Welcome to The Reaction. I'm Sarah Vine.
And I'm Andrew Pearce.
So, Andrew.
Well, why did they bother carting everybody down to Silverstone?
Well, I don't know.
Home of Grand Prix racing, even I know that, for the manifesto launch when they could have been in a warehouse in Milton Keynes. You could not see the racetrack.
Yes.
It was supposed to be a celebration of British excellence because we've had lots of Formula One champions. Think of Lewis Hamilton, think of Graham Hill.
Yep.
Somebody else, Damon Hill. But
People who drive fast.
But they couldn't go out on the racetrack because that man Brad Pitt was there. I, for one, would rather have seen Brad Pitt than the Prime Minister.
If I'd known Brad Pitt was going to be there, I would definitely have gone to the launch.
So he was filming there, which meant the British Prime Minister's delegation. Do they not do any forward planning?
I know.
In number 10?
I know.
Because look, we had the bizarre launch when he got soaked because nobody wanted to have the Wally with the brolly. We've had various other blunders. We'll talk, I'm sure, about D-Day in a moment, but it was just a sense of anticlimax.
Well, why didn't he even do a photo op with Brad Pitt, or did Brad Pitt not want to?
Might not have been good for Brad Pitt's street cred to be a photograph with a man who won't be Prime Minister for very much longer, the way the polls are going.
But surely whoever was planning this event would have checked to see whether there was something else going on.
You'd have thought so.
And they clearly haven't.
No, as usual.
But I'm told that they're running out of money quite badly.
They are.
I'm told that they're really struggling to raise funds, that the sort of taps have turned off.
Big donors see an inevitable defeat. Why are they going to write a cheque for that? The Prime Minister won't be Prime Minister in 3 months' time. He might not be in a position to hand out baubles. Not that I'm suggesting people give money to political parties, Sarah, for a bauble in return. Think of Lord or Sir or Dame so-and-so. Not one of those will I name, of course. But yes, they are short of cash, and Labour are awash with money because they've got the trade unions and big donors are coming back. And that man, Lord Levy discovered Alvin Stardust in his music career.
Yeah.
He was Tony Blair's fundraiser.
Yeah.
Then he got a peerage, not linked, of course.
No.
He is back fundraising for Keir Starmer, and that's bad news for the Tories.
Yes, I mean, the polls are what attract the donors, really, aren't they? Because they just hope...
The smell of victory.
To be honest, at the end of the day, all they ever really want is a gong, in my experience.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. That's the only reason they do anything. But let's talk about the actual manifesto itself. Some good stuff in there, more NHS dentists. I mean, what's not to like about that?
Yeah, but so it's fine to have more NHS dentists, but they've got to say in the contract, when you've done your expensive training, which takes many years at public expense,
you have to work for a certain period.
Which we now have to do, I think, with junior doctors, because we can't have them all clearing off to Australia, sunny climate, when we paid for their training. So if you talk to the people who run the Dental Association, they say, we're not paying them. They get paid more in the private sector, so they can't go in the private sector and they can't go abroad. Yeah,
I mean, they should be contracted. They should be told they have to work for 5 years in the state sector before they can go off and do their stuff.
But that is missing from the manifesto.
That is missing from the manifesto, exactly.
And it's a mistake.
Rwanda again, getting grip on immigration, Thatcherite tax cuts. What does that mean?
Well, I don't think cutting national insurance is particularly Thatcherite tax cuts. I think back to the 1988 budget when Nigel Lawson was Chancellor of the Exchequer, the uproar in the Commons was so pronounced. The Speaker, Bernard Weather, had to suspend the Commons proceeding. It never happened in a budget in modern time. It's because the Thatcher government was cutting the top rate of tax from 60p in the pound to 40p in the pound. That's radical Thatcherism, not cutting national insurance a bit
But also,
more.
don't forget that the income tax had gone sky high under the previous Labour government.
Chad.
I mean, I think at one point it was 90%, wasn't it?
Yeah, 98.
98%.
Yeah.
So
on the super rich, which is why they all cleared off abroad.
Exactly, which is
and
why
they all
all
started coming back.
So they were starting from a very different base, really. I mean, the thing is about the national insurance is I don't really mind paying my national insurance, to be perfectly honest.
Well, if you thought it went to the NHS, you probably would mind less, but it doesn't. It just disappears into a black hole called government waste.
It does, but I mean, it's the one tax that I don't really mind about, if you know what I mean. I mean, I think income tax is a much more. Because the thing about income tax is that the harder you work, the more you earn, and therefore the more you pay tax. Yeah. Do you see what I mean? And I think you need to incentivize people to work more.
Of course. And, and pensioners who've worked hard all their lives and paid in the system, they don't benefit from cuts in national insurance because they don't pay it.
No, they don't pay it. So I think that's I think what you want is you want to try and incentivize people to be ambitious in their work lives and to earn as much as they can. And if you start charging them a lot in income tax, they're not going to do that. I mean, I've got lots of friends who've been offered, who say there's no point in me taking a pay rise because it pushes me into the next tax bracket, and I end up just paying more.
And so that's the point. So Rishi Sunak says, we are cutting income tax. No, they're not, because they've frozen the tax thresholds until 2028, which means even more people are going to be taken into tax, even more people are going to be taken into the 40p rate, the 45p rate. So they are still increasing income tax by stealth, and they should be honest about it.
Absolutely. And they've done things like they've introduced this tax on people's sort of side hustles. So my daughter, for example, who sells a lot of her clothes on Vinted, or I think that's right.
Vintage.
Vinted, that secondhand, Depop, those secondhand websites. Well, when she wears
a dress. I don't buy secondhand clothes.
A lot of the young people do.
Sure
she wears a lot of her clothes 5 times and then sells them, and that's sort of it's quite a nice thing for her. She's at university, she can fund herself a little bit that way. Now she's going to have to do a tax return on that,
which is so infuriating.
Which is just like,
and people who I've got a friend who sells old Agatha Christie books on eBay, and it's a nice little business. She's probably only about £3,000 a year. It's a bit of pin money.
It's sort of £700, but she still now has to do a tax return, and it's just
tiresome and more work for the HMRC that they don't need, because they don't answer the phone as it is.
You can't get through to them anyway.
No.
The only time they get in touch is when they want to get money out of you.
And by the way, talking of tax, has anyone seen the charts of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt?
No.
Is he allowed? Is he alive?
Absolutely without leave. Who knows?
Gone.
And the other thing, I think, talking of young people, is this idea to end low quality degrees. And I sort of think, what.
Well, they call them Mickey Mouse degrees.
Yes, but how are you defining a low quality degree? I mean, I did a languages degree. Is that a low quality degree? It's not a very useful degree.
No, it is.
Because I didn't become a translator, but it was a very interesting and I think quite mind expanding degree.
You could have become an air stewardess.
I could have done. I could have said doors to manual all the time.
In
French, Spanish, Italian.
Yeah, just imagine.
But, I mean, I think it's difficult for our generation because, of course, we were educated for free at university.
Yeah.
We didn't have to pay any fees or anything like that. So we sort of haven't got a leg to stand on. But I do think this sort of kind of talking down of
talking down
young people's ambitions is bad.
But I do understand that they're saying they want to create an extra 100,000 apprenticeships, and I think that's terrific, because that's a noble thing. Plumbers, Sarah, are never out of work.
No.
A good sparky, never out of work.
No.
Find a good sparky or plumber.
Yeah.
My word, you put their name on the phone and it's gold, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that's correct. But I think the thing is, the Tories have a real problem with the younger generation as it is, and I'm not sure this terribly helps them,
because they feel their options are being taken away.
Yeah,
from
and
them.
if you contrast them with what the Lib Dems are saying, Lib Dems, I mean, a straw poll of my sort of my children's 19 to 22-year-old peer group, Lib Dems are very popular for the simple reason they all want to legalise weed. Yeah. And of course they're all delighted at this prospect.
But not that it's going to stop them if they do or they don't.
No, I know, but they all think, oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
So there's that. So the Lib Dems are kind of, they've got that. And then, of course, Labour is suggesting votes for 16-year-olds, which I think would be insane, because quite honestly, I wouldn't trust a 16-year-old to load my dishwasher, let alone vote in general election. But the point is that most 16-year-olds, will probably vote Labour, because I can't remember who said it. If you're not a socialist when you're in your 20s, you've got no heart, and if you're not a conservative in your 40s, you have no head.
That's right.
But young people tend to be more left leaning.
Of course they do. And votes for 16, but they won't use the votes, because they've got the vote at 16 in Scotland, and it's made no difference.
No.
Because they just can't be bothered.
No.
But they'll be interesting, the Green Party too, because they launched their campaign today. I don't know why the Green Party leader, is her name Carla Denyer, had to tell us that she's pansexual.
Oh, how exciting!
Why do we care?
Is that sex in pans?
I don't know. I mean,
pan
doesn't pan mean everything?
Yes, sorry. I thought, isn't Pan the god of something or other?
Yes. Well, there's also Pan in His Dark Materials. Philip.
Yes.
Pan's a very important part of.
Yes, I'm not sure I care who you sleep with.
Well, who I sleep with. Oh, you're not talking to me. You mean generally?
Generally. Who one sleeps with. But yes. So what's there is that. So what have they got a policy on pansexuality?
But what they have got, they're going to make the rich people pay more, and in doing that, they're going to renationalise every single utility.
Brilliant.
Everything. So
Okay.
water,
Yes.
gas, electricity. So people, if you are earning quite a lot of money, I think you probably better not vote Green, because I think the tax is probably going to be
Yes.
back to
Yes.
Labour levels of 98p in the pound.
So this is the interesting thing. So I'm not, just to go back to the Conservative manifesto for a moment, I'm not sure it sort of landed particularly well.
I don't think it went badly.
Yeah.
But there were no surprises.
No.
I thought perhaps there might be one or two, but there wasn't. And they've cut national insurance twice, and it did not move the dial at all politically.
No.
So why did they think it would do it again? And when it doesn't work the first time, isn't that the definition of insanity if you keep doing it
I
again
agree.
and again?
Yes.
So I think it would have been better just to say off of income tax.
Yeah.
Or perhaps they were going to spend more on the NHS. Although I don't want them to spend more on the NHS, I just want them to sort out the NHS.
I'd like them to just privatise the NHS. That's what I'd like them to do, which is what they should have done when they got into power 14 years ago.
Well, when
I mean, I do. The point is the NHS is great, but it doesn't work because there's too many people trying to use it and not enough resources. And if you just had a system like they have in Italy or France, which is a sort of mutuelle system, which is you pay a percentage of what you can afford to pay, and if you're very, if you're old or poor, you don't pay anything. But most people pay a small amount. But it works brilliantly.
It's happening already with NHS. Now, the Tories said they'll create more dentists. We've talked about that, because what's the point if you allow them then to clear off after they've done their basic training to the private sector abroad? The Labour Party say they're going to create more dentists too. But the point I'm making is we're already paying to go to a dentist through the NHS.
Yeah.
So So if you have to pay for your checkup, an NHS dentist, why don't you have to pay for your checkup to go and see a GP? Because that would weed out all the people who go and see the GP 3 times a week.
Yeah, I mean, for example, I know people who live in France and Italy, and it's a very simple system. You go along, you have to pay to see the doctor.
Yeah.
And then, but it's not a sort of egregious amount of money.
£10?
I think it's about €30.
Yeah.
Something like that. And you see the doctor, and the doctor refers you. And now, if you have, depending on your sort of your kind of social security status, you will either then not pay for your treatment, or you'll pay for some of your treatment.
Yeah.
But it makes the whole system much more fluid, because it means that people get processed through the system.
Of course.
Because there isn't a great big blockage of everybody trying to get down the same tube. So, for example, my father, who's had a heart attack and a stroke and everything, he was treated by the Italian state system. After he had his stroke, he had a very serious stroke, they paid for him to go, his pension obviously, they paid for him to go into rehab for a month.
Amazing.
A month, residential rehab. I mean, you wouldn't get that.
No, you would not.
You just wouldn't get that in the UK.
But if you,
he had to pay for some of it.
Yeah.
But
Of course,
the most of it was paid for.
And if this money's coming in there, it will mean, I'm not going to pay to go to the doctor. I'll go and see the pharmacist.
Yeah.
And then you can get the problem sorted.
I think also pharmacists can prescribe very easily.
They can.
Things like UTI infections or a sty or an
Sore
infected
throat.
cat or a sore throat.
I've got a persistent sore throat. Why are you going to the doctor? Just go and see a pharmacist.
So I think on the NHS, I think this rigid thinking, but this is going back to Keir Starmer. He has this rigid thinking. We saw this in his debate with Rishi Sunak when he was asked if you had a very seriously ill relative and the only way to get them their treatment was for you to pay, would you put your hand in the pocket and would you pay? And he said no.
I'm still amazed that that's not become a major issue.
For me,
in the
that is a
campaign.
major issue, because that is an indicator of the person's mindset, which is that
He's an ideologue.
they will cut off their nose, or in this case, kill a relative, in order to stick to their ideals, or kill a relative. But you know what I mean. I'm being a bit silly, but what I'm saying is that that rigidity of ideas is not good.
The left cheered it. People on the hard left cheered it. The trade unions cheered it. But we've seen, Sarah, also with his ideology, this appalling attack on private schools. You wrote about it very elegantly in your column last week, I think, or this week, and 20% on VAT fees. Now, they keep saying the schools can absorb it. No, I've talked to 2 private school head teachers this week who say they are expecting around 10% of pupils to be taken out immediately. That's going to have a dramatic impact on the school's ability to function as a viable operation. Where are those 10%? So this school in particular, one of them, this was a school in Gloucester, not an elite city. It's a very multicultural city, and they've got 700 pupils. And he said at least 10%. I think I'm going to lose. So that's at least 70 pupils. Where does Keir Starmer think they're going to go?
Well, it's interesting
What school are
because
they going to go
somebody said to me, oh, well, it won't have much of an impact on state schools, but it will, because if you're a state school parent, your child's class is probably already quite big.
I'm sure it is.
And those children will, so, you will have bigger class sizes. Now, Emily Thornberry was telling...
She's the Shadow Attorney General.
Sorry, Shadow Attorney General.
Yeah.
I never know the titles.
Yeah.
She was saying, oh, well, that doesn't matter. We'll just have bigger class sizes. It does matter. Class sizes are really important.
But she was slapped down very quickly by Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, and Keir Starmer. They said she was wrong. No, she wasn't. She told the truth.
She did.
Of course class size
Of course they will.
And if I have another Labour spokesman say to me, no, you don't understand. The birth rate is falling. What does that difference does that make if your child is 14 or 15 and you're taking them out of a private school?
Exactly.
Birth rate makes no difference.
But as a parent who went through lockdown with my two children, and both my children were seriously impacted by the fact that the schools were closed during lockdown. I wrote loads of articles saying they should be kept open, they should be essential services. Basically, their sort of the tail end of both their educations was torpedoed by that,
and they never get it back.
They get one shot. It really is M&M. It's one shot. They get one shot, and if they miss it, it's very difficult for them to recover, because it's not just about their academic failure. It's to do with their they lose heart. They think, oh well, there's no point. So these children, Labour is playing fast and loose with them,
and they don't care.
No, they don't care because they're rich children. So.
And they say you can worry about the 7% of children, but we're worrying about the 93%. They don't care what happens to these
all
kids.
Children should have a right. It doesn't matter who their parents are.
I just don't understand why Labour thinks it's right to tax a child's education.
No, quite exactly. But the thing is, let's go back to this launch. And the fact is that, as we've just discussed, Labour have got a lot of inconsistencies in what they're saying. They're also not saying a lot, to be honest. We're saying very little.
Well, they're relying on the Tories to mess it up.
So why is it that the Tories are doing so badly? Why is Sunak doing so badly? And I think it's his tone and I wrote about this on Sunday. Leaving that Normandy celebration early was an absolute disaster. I don't know why, who advised him, what happened, where it went wrong. But maybe you know more than me. I don't know.
I don't think I saw there's been an inquest about which advisor advised him. It's not about his advisors. It's about his instinct.
It's his judgment.
He should have
looked at his diary on that day and said, "Look, there's a thing here. I need nothing." There's nothing else.
He's the British Prime Minister. It was a British joint operation with the Americans and the Canadians. Why did he not want to be?
Apparently, he'd asked Grant Shapps to stand in for him.
I know.
Instead
and then
of David
they realised
Cameron.
that would look pretty bad.
Oh
and why
God.
didn't David Cameron, a very senior politician, a man who's been Prime Minister for 6 years, why did he not say, Prime Minister, have you taken complete leave of your senses? Do not leave. Or did David Cameron throw him under a bus, because that's Dave for you, because he wanted to be by Joe Biden, because that burnishes his credentials, because we all know the only reason Cameron took that job as Foreign Secretary is because his reputation was destroyed.
Well, it was a good photo
by the Greensill lobbying scandal.
Yeah, I mean, it was.
And he thought he had a year as Foreign Secretary.
And it's a good photo opportunity for him, standing next to the world's leaders.
For Dave.
Yeah. But then Sunak's done it again during this launch, where he sort of, as a way of telling people how deprived he was as a child, he said, "Oh, we didn't have any Sky TV." I mean, isn't that a tin ear?
Tin-eared.
When
he was asked by the journalist who helped bring down Boris Johnson, Paul Brand on ITV, he's doing his job, of course. But when he asked him, he said, well, can you relate to people who are struggling? Of course I can. I went without things. Why did he get himself into that, box himself into that? Boris Johnson never had this problem. Boris Johnson was incredibly privileged. He didn't win a scholarship to Eton. His family sent him to Eton, the richest school in Britain. He came from, they had a big estate, they had a big farm down in the West Country. Boris would just would parry those questions away.
What is this? Because then Keir Starmer then countered with, my family didn't have enough money to fix
No, I
a
lived in a
window,"
shoebox.
or something like that. I tweeted just for a
Or was
laugh.
it a matchbox?
I tweeted, "I grew up without a telly. Does that mean I can be Prime Minister?" I mean, it's not a competition,
No,
guys.
I know.
It really isn't.
But there's Rishi, because he's married into one of the richest families in India. He's thinking he's got to try and say, actually, I'm not privileged. He won a scholarship. He should have just said, I was one of the lucky ones.
Yeah.
My family worked very hard. Yeah. My dad's a doctor. Have I told you that before? My mum's a pharmacist. Have I told you that before? And
did you know, by the way, that
Keir Starmer was a toolmaker?
Yeah, apparently
his father's a toolmaker. Did you know that? So he could have repeated that old boring canard and said, I was very lucky, but they did have to make sacrifices to get me to Winchester School. Yeah. But nobody thinks somebody who's at one of the most expensive schools in the country possibly went through the hardship. And I have to say, if it was me, I could have listed some of the things we struggled with when we were growing up, but it's tiresome. It's boring.
But it is a very peculiarly English British thing, this obsession with
people's wealth.
You're only good if you come from a poor background.
Did Michael Heseltine ever have to put up with these questions? His publishing empire makes him worth about £500 million. He lives in a virtual stately home out there in Oxfordshire, and he's got an arboretum, which he's very proud of, and he's shown many camera cues around. Do people say to him, "Oh, yeah, what do you know about..." People never... And he'd have parried it away. But yet again, his tin-eared Prime Minister with his tin-eared advisors, if I'd been in the room with Prime Minister, I'd have been going... if you're listening, I'm waving, saying, gesticulating, don't answer that question. Yeah. And he walked straight into a trap, led by the nose. So instead of us talking about the manifesto on TV
we're talking about Sky Telly.
We're talking about Sky Telly.
Yeah.
And back then, by the way, when he was 12 years old, very few people had Sky TV.
Very few. I think when he was 12, I can't remember. How old is he now? 42?
44.
44. Yeah. I mean, I used to rent a telly from Radio Rentals.
Yeah. In 1994, very few people had Sky Telly. You used to, because I was working on the Times then in the early days, and we thought, God, is Rupert Murdoch's business going to go completely under because nobody's at Sky? And I used to count the Sky dishes, thinking, oh no, there's not enough. We need more.
More Sky.
But I didn't have one because I couldn't possibly afford it, and I worked for the flipping Times, and they offered it as a discount, and I still could. Am I deprived? No.
Exactly.
Big mistake again by the
Prime
Minister.
This is the problem. So the real danger here is what's the new buzzword around Westminster is supermajority.
Yeah. Well, because we've got Farage.
Because the danger is that Sunak is messing it up so badly that people will either vote Labour or they'll vote Farage. Farage is only 2 points behind the Labour on the polls?
It depends which poll you see. There was a poll today, an ITV poll, 13 points behind. Another poll, 6. I think in our paper in the Mail, 6 points behind. But every time a goon throws something at Nigel Farage, up goes his rating because people see him as the Trump figure, the anti-establishment figure.
Well, we saw from that 7-way debate that happened the other night. That debate was basically, Angela Rayner and
Penny Mordaunt.
Swordwoman, Penny Mordaunt having a sort of row.
Yeah.
And then Nigel sort of giggling on the sidelines.
Throwing in the odd
just being sort of cheeky and naughty.
And which he does very, very
well.
And
the thing is people relate to that. It's, again, interestingly, amongst my straw poll of 19 to 25-year-old voters, they either want to vote Lib Dem because of the weed or they want to vote Nige because they call him Nige and they love him. They think he's hysterically funny.
Smoking his fag.
He's kind of fun guy and a fun political guy because there are no fun political guys.
I know, and he gets out of his helicopter and he doesn't care if people say why, and he has a car, takes him here, there and everywhere.
And he says things like, oh, nice melons when he goes around, vegetable markets.
I've known him for years. He's funny, he's entertaining, he's incredibly clever and he's very strategic and he knows what he's doing. Yeah. But now I was talking to David Davis today, who's been a stalwart of the Tory party for years, was the Brexit secretary. Yeah. He has got a Reform candidate against him in his Yorkshire constituency, and it is ridiculous because David is a proper Tory,
proper politician,
and Nigel Farage. Why would Nigel Farage put a candidate up against David Davis and others like that? Because, as David said, every vote for Labour for Farage is a vote for a bigger Labour majority.
So you might as well be voting Labour. If you're voting for Farage, you're basically voting Labour.
You're voting for Labour. So if you think Keir Starmer is boring, but much more sinisterly, as Sarah and I think, a real left winger, you vote for Reform, you are going to give if you vote for Reform, you're going to give Starmer a huge majority. And big majorities, it means votes for 16-year-old
Yeah.
Sarah. He'd have the mandate to go and take us back into the European Union.
Yeah.
All those problems.
Votes for prisoners.
Votes for prisoners.
Votes for EU
votes for EU
citizens, yeah.
nationals. Just think what he's going to do
No
to this
votes
country.
for people in the army. I mean, you could end up with a situation where he locks the system down so that it's impossible for any
A
opposition
Labour government forever.
to make. And I think, one of the problems with politics is there isn't enough effective opposition. And actually, Labour are about to get elected, but they have been a really ineffective opposition during 14 years of Tory power.
And if the Tories are down to 130 seats, which is what one poll suggests, they've got no opposition.
No, they've got none whatsoever.
The biggest hitters could be gone, like David Davis.
Absolutely. And of course, the thing about it is that, people will vote for Farage, but the only person who's likely to get a seat for reform is Farage. They won't get it because we have a first past the post system.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that is where we are with it all. It's quite depressing.
It's very depressing because a landslide win for Starmer is perilous for this country.
Yeah. Talking of perilous politics, Joe Biden.
Oh, my God.
So we have to talk about this because the internet, I don't know if the dear listeners have seen this, but the internet is full
Of course.
of pictures of Biden just sort of freezing like a weird kind of
He looked like
AI
a waxwork
robot.
dummy.
Yes.
I thought, is this...
I mean, his plastic surgery is out of control.
Really is.
So he does look quite strange as it is, and also just being completely incoherent and not appearing to make any sense or know where he
It
is.
was some event where there was a lot of black people dancing in a line. There was George Floyd, who was famously triggered, the man who was murdered by a police officer.
And he was just standing there like a Ken doll.
Didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris, the vice president, was dancing very badly next to him.
Politicians should never dance.
dance.
Let's talk about Theresa May.
Oh, very bad. Dancing Queen. I don't think so. Let's talk about Michael Gove dancing once. God, I had to write a piece about that. If you thought that was bad dancing, I danced to ABBA to him at a party.
You've danced with him.
I have. And he has 3 right feet, not left. You couldn't say left about Michael Gove. But and then next to Kamala Harris was a very curious man with long black hair who was wearing a very long frock. Look, I make no comment about that.
I think I think it was a lady, wasn't it?
I don't think so. Do ladies have beards? Not perhaps they do in America.
Do they have penises though? That's the question I want.
Well, that's a question for Keir Starmer, as you asked in your column only last week. But Biden was frozen.
But, I mean, he looked like a Ken doll. He just looked like somebody taking him out of his packaging.
Yeah. And he couldn't move his head. And then slowly...
But also there was no one at home.
No
you
one.
looked at his eyes and it was totally vacant.
And he slowly moves his hand up because George Floyd's brother obviously says to him, Mr. President, I'm going to punch. So they sort of punch. He didn't know what he was doing.
No.
It was painful to watch. The men in white coats have to come and get him.
Well, I mean, it's obvious that he's obviously got some sort of cognitive impairment, hasn't he?
Very substantial.
Yeah. So
and another 4 years of this.
And this is the leader of the free world that we're talking
terrifying.
about here.
It's terrifying.
I mean, this is the person who. I mean, if you're the president of China or Russia or North Korea, you're not looking at that and thinking,
how can you negotiate
with
him?
Fancy my chances there.
I know. The joke I always tell about Joe Biden, the Democrats are so worried about him doing a second term.
Yeah.
They're thinking of telling him he already has. Brings the house down. But it brings the house down.
But between him and then of course there's Donald Trump, who is not particularly cognitively impaired. He's just morally impaired.
Yeah. Well, he's now a criminal.
He is.
But he can campaign from a prison cell. He can be president from a prison
cell. He's a politician with convictions.
He's literally 34. Mind you, it was a trumped up living thing, wasn't it? Oh, get the pun. Trumped up.
Yeah.
That was unintentional. But I mean, he's not guilty of 34 charges. He's guilty of one charge of paying his lawyer to pay, apparently, Stormy Daniels. But because the payments came in 34 separate tranches, he's got
34 different convictions.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, wow.
America is a joke.
Anyway,
but apparently they can. There is a mechanism to get rid of the president. That either she steps in, Kamala Harris. They won't allow that because her poll rating is even lower than Biden's.
Oh, terrible! Yes.
So what would happen would be at the Democrat convention in the autumn, the Democrats can vote for a new candidate.
But presumably it'd just be a shoo-in. Who would it be?
They don't know.
Hillary Clinton?
Or Mrs. Obama?
Obama?
She's not interested. Hillary Clinton. Oh, no.
Well, she was very keen to do it the other time, wasn't she?
She's 4 years older.
On the Trump thing, we've got a bit of an exclusive on the Daily Mail.
We always have exclusives on
Stormy
the Daily Mail.
Daniels.
Sure. I can't wait to hear
the lady herself.
She's
going to be on a podcast.
with us.
Yes. Everything I Know About Me. It's called.
When are we going to hear that?
I don't know.
It's out now. Well, actually, I'm looking forward to tuning in.
Yes, dying to know the inside
She's got
story of
lots
that.
to say.
She has got lots
about
to say.
Still, the man I think will be our next president.
America. So let's just recap. The UK is obviously screwed. Can I say screwed?
You just did.
America's screwed. So I mean, I'm a bit worried.
And who's the beneficiary of this? Dictators like the Chinese dictator.
The West is basically up in a heap.
And in France, the ludicrous Macron.
Europe, yes, he's just called an election,
which he knows his own side is probably going to lose.
Yeah,
and
all across Europe, the right are sort of on the march.
And we could get to the position where we have Frexit. Imagine.
Yes.
Imagine if that happened on Macron's watch.
I mean, extraordinary.
Marine Le Pen's government, if she wins, starts a process to take France out of the EU.
But doesn't it? Am I just the only? Do you not feel that it's all completely terrifying?
It is.
On 27 different levels.
Yeah, another reason why we can't allow a Labour landslide in this country.
Exactly.
Because we have to have a proper opposition say, oi, what's happening here?
Because if Keir Starmer was Blair, I wouldn't be nearly so worried, to be perfectly honest. Because I always felt that Blair had a sort of, was basically a centrist politician.
He was not a socialist, and he was happy to say he wasn't a socialist. But Starmer is a socialist.
Starmer really is. He really,
which means
really
they want to tax you.
But what that means in my head is that he's an extremist, effectively. He's a political, he's a very polarising figure.
And look at the terrible people around him.
Exactly. And then you've got this polarisation to the other end of the spectrum, and then they all meet in the middle, and it's all just madness.
I know.
And then America's completely adrift with these two crazy people who are one of them. To be honest, neither of them is a good prospect.
But we have to have Trump over Biden because more evidence.
But that's like choosing a turd over a pile of vomit.
I don't know if you can say that, but you just have.
I can say turd. It's not a rude word.
Okay.
Pile of vomit is definitely.
Yes.
My dog was vomiting, so
that's because she's missing me because I met her last week for the first time.
She's been very sick, and I can promise you, I would prefer dog turd over dog vomit.
Right.
Any day of the week.
Oh, well,
but anyway, it is like choosing a turd over vomit.
Okay. Yeah, there is that. Now, the saddest story of the week, of course. We're all so sad. I used to see him bouncing around this office. Dr.
He
Michael
did,
Mosley.
and he came on. When I did the other podcast, he came on that a few times. He was brilliant, Michael Mosley,
a great communicator.
And it's just so sad. I can't believe it's happened. It's like it's just so unexpected, and also just so tragically unnecessary.
Devastating for his wife and family, and devastating, I think, from what I've read, that he got within 100 yards where he could have been spotted. 100 yards of a busy taverna in the middle of the afternoon. But he clearly fainted or became unconscious because of the heat.
He must have just got that heat can really get to you.
But he had a tiny bottle of water, a baseball cap and an umbrella. And he obviously got lost because he was disorientated. But what a loss, to not just for his family.
And such a shame that he didn't have something like a kind of, Apple Watch, or no, I shouldn't say Apple Watch, but a smart watch, because they would have been able to locate him much faster.
But also, or have his phone with him.
Yeah.
It's another reason why at this day and age, take your phone everywhere.
Because I have my location services on for my children, because they're the only people who are interested in my whereabouts. But it just means that if I fell down a drain, for example, which might happen, and they couldn't find me, they could just do a ping thing, and they'd be able to go, oh, there she is down the drain.
And they say, go and put the manhole over.
Go stick the manhole. That's it. Don't tell anyone.
She was a nice mum, but honestly, reading the statement from Michael Mosley's lovely wife. Heartrending. And
the thing is, I remember when he did the 5-2. I remember years ago watching the documentary that he did on the 5-2, which was the sort of thing that started it all off. And I was watching it, and I was thinking, and I was reviewing television at the time for the Times, I think. I remember thinking, okay, this is going to be absolutely massive. This is brilliant what this guy has discovered. Yeah. And we all know that obesity is a huge problem, and he really has. I mean, he will have saved the lives of countless people who, because of him, would have done that system and will have reversed their diabetes.
Because he reversed his diabetes.
Yeah, he did.
And people believed in him.
So that's his legacy. I mean, he really was
and he was authentic.
Absolutely authentic and a gentle soul, and the fact that he sort of used himself as a guinea pig, I always thought that was incredibly admirable, because he was sort of
swallowed all those tapeworms.
Yeah, and he sort of put his money where his mouth was, doesn't he? And that was the extraordinary thing. I just think it's just there are just some people who should never die. ever. They shouldn't be allowed. There should be a law against them dying.
Particularly at that age, 67.
And I think he's probably one of them, and so it's such a sad thing, especially since he was, very young, 67.
No age.
No age at all.
No.
And he'd done all these amazing things so that he was going to live for a long time. And then, I think the moral of the story is carpe diem, because you never know when life is going to get you.
I know. Now, we got some very interesting messages, of course.
Oh, yes.
Shall we read one from Bouncing Betty? That's my mum's name.
Ooh.
Not that mum's with us anymore, but she probably wouldn't have liked to be called Bouncing Betty. But Bouncing Betty from Cambridge says she'd like to see the basic threshold in taxation increased. Good luck, Betty, because we agree with you on that. But actually, those of us who were responsible and took out private pensions to ensure we could look after ourselves in old age are being penalised. 50% of my small private pension now funds my tax. Why did I bother? It's taken me above the limit for the government help. So it's a lose. But I don't know what your politics are, Betty, but you probably are potentially a classic Tory voter who's been whacked.
Well, I mean, it's that thing of, I've done everything right. I've saved. I've put money away.
Thrift.
I've bought my house because they're going to get us on capital gain tax as well. All of these things. And no, none of it. You don't get to keep any of it. Mike 0456 from Nebworth says, I'm really starting to struggle with who's paying for all the extra expenditure with the amount of cuts being made. There has to be income from somewhere, and there's no real sense of where or who or how from any party. There's going to be a lot of broken promises and excuses over the next 4 years.
Well, I heard one minister say since COVID, the benefit bill has soared to 69 billion. It's going to go up to 99 billion in about 3-4 more years. They're going to cut 12 billion. There must be, Sarah, a substantial portion of people who never went back to work after COVID and frankly should have.
Yeah.
And they've been indulged for too long. Why have we got so many people on sickness benefit? Get them. Oh, it's their mental health, that's why.
Well, what's going to happen is that fewer and fewer people are going to be paying for more and more people, and that's going to upset a lot of people. And if they can, they will leave. Yeah. But the slight problem is we can't leave because we can't go to the EU anymore. My parents left, in the 70s.
You could go to the Isle of Man.
You could go to the Isle of Man. But my parents left in the mid-70s for this very, very reason.
They saw what was coming under a Labour government. They were right.
Yeah,
and then Thatcher turned it all round, and it's all being undone.
Yeah.
What would she make of it?
Well, I don't know.
Somebody's got something to say about Biden. Oh, and it's from Reno in the
Well,
United States.
Fantastic. This says more about his constituents who vote for him than his condition and capacity to perform. We've moved into weekend at Bernie's territory.
Love that.
Yes. I feel sorry for the Americans. I mean, maybe they look at us and think they feel sorry for us. I don't know.
I don't understand why the First Lady, who looks like a very nice woman, hasn't whispered in her husband's ear, enough. It has to stop.
Yeah.
Or his children. Well, Hunter's about to go to prison, of
Hunter
course.
Biden's about to go to prison.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very strange story.
Yeah, it is.
What an odd person.
But the First Lady, they were always influential.
Yeah.
They always say it was Dennis Thatcher who said to Mrs. Thatcher, it has to go.
Yeah.
And Philip, and actually Liz Truss in her book, which we still realised in the Mail, it was her husband who said, after 49 days, you can't do this. And she quit. And I think actually...
Well, it was Samantha Cameron that made David Cameron.
Yeah, and Philip May, Theresa May's husband, I always called him the man from CNA, although that's probably a slur on CNA. He said, time to quit. She should never have been there in the first place.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, he said to go.
Really?
She should go. I think because they see close up.
Yes, I mean, spouses understand it completely.
Yeah,
but
they see the
But the problem is that if you're a politician, you're surrounded by people whose interests it is to keep you where you are. Yeah. So Biden and Trump, to an extent, but Biden certainly will be surrounded by people who would not have the status that they have and the jobs that they have were he not the president of the United States of America. So it's not in there. They're turkeys and they're not going to vote for Christmas.
No, absolutely.
So on that note... that's the end of today's episode. I have to read out some things about how you can send some messages to us if you want to.
They don't have to be nice either.
They don't have to be nice. You feel
can
free to be rude.
If you object to Sarah, you can say so.
Stop bullying me. Okay.
Object to me.
No one objects to you. reaction@dailymail.co.uk. That's the email address. Or you can leave a comment on Spotify.
Which is to do with music.
Yes, it is. Or you can... yes, it's not a spot thing.
No.
Not skincare. Or you can send us a voice note on WhatsApp on 07796 657 512, and you can start your message with the word reaction. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week.
And we'll have just 2 weeks and 1 day of the election to go. The excitement, the bated breath.
I can barely wait.
Exactly. And we'll have had the Labour Party manifesto by then, and we'll have had Reform UK's manifesto, but they're not calling it a manifesto, they're calling it
a business plan.
Exactly.
Because they're a business.
A contract. They're a business, and it's in Companies House, and the person who owns that business is Nigel Farage. He owns 53% of the business, and the man he ousted for the leadership, Richard Tice, owns 33%.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.